and start. Courtney, would you mind doing a roll call? Thanks.
Yes. So I'll just read the people I can see here on my screen then. We have Mark Morgan.
Here.
Hillary Cooper. Commissioner Jody
Sorry,
Shaw.
here.
No, it's okay. Christy Belton.
Here.
Christina Beery.
Here.
And then Julie Stencil.
Here.
Paige Lewis.
Here.
And Pat Dorsey.
Here.
Great, so that does give us a quorum.
Great. And I think you mentioned me, but I didn't get a chance to say here, so I'll say here. So,
Great.
well, great. So I hope you all had a chance to review the minutes. Anyone had any changes or additions to those minutes? I welcome a motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Julie will second.
I think Hillary was first, but we'll do Hillary. Thank you, though. And I can't see your names on the phone number, so I'm just going to try to, we'll have to say your names. I'm trying to keep track of who's who. So, motions on the table. All those in favor for approval of the minutes, say aye and raise your hand. Aye.
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 Great. Anybody opposed? The minutes are approved. Wonderful. Okay. Just wanted to get some updates. Courtney, do you have any updates? I know Director Combs had mentioned he would be available last week when the Forest Health Council was meeting, or some other updates. I did, and I was hoping he might be here because I heard some information about his tour, the governor's tour, which I didn't get to go to, but I saw them all right afterwards. So of the nursery. So do you know if we have any updates? Did the Wildfire Matters committee have any questions or any updates on any of those? And I can just mention about the tour since I heard some information right afterwards.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't have any updates. I haven't heard of any questions that the Wildfire Matters Review Committee had for the Department of Natural Resources. I know that their next meeting is September 28th, so that's when the council will be voting on which 5 concepts or bill drafts they would like to advance. So that's the only timeline update I have.
Sorry, my button doesn't want to unmute. Great. Well, then
Jody, you're muted again.
Stop muting. So thank you for that. So I had just been able to talk with the governor and some of those folks who took the tour of the nursery when he was in Fort Collins. I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. It seems like a long time ago. And it just sounds like he was, they saw the conditions and some of the duct tape and some of the, I call it MacGyvering of the nursery and kind of how it maybe needs to be brought up to more innovative or new kind of equipment and stuff. And so I think he was glad, and from the other, I think there were some state reps there that we were glad they got to see the facility and the conditions. So I think that was helpful for that tour. So that's all I have for that. I just heard that they were realize it needs maybe some more support to help it kind of be able to meet the capacity that may be needed going forward. So that's all I have with that, unless someone else had heard some other insights from that. So, but I just wanted to kind of see if, in case Director McCombs was here, that we could hear some more details. So then we'll move on to the next item, which, unless anybody else has any questions or comments. Okay, well, we'll move on. I look forward to Christy's presentation that she wanted. I know she's been waiting for a while to give this presentation, and look forward to what you have to share with us, Christy. And I'm not sure how you named your presentation, so I just kind of left it on other mitigation measures because I wasn't sure what the the scope that you were going to cover today. So I'll just turn it over to you to do the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, I'm at a land broker meeting in Grand Junction, so I stepped out of the meeting so that I could be in our meeting. And I did a like a PowerPoint presentation, and you guys will have to bear with me for just a sec because I really don't know how to share with Google Meets.
Can
So-
you email it to Courtney and she could quickly share it, help you share it?
You know, it's a PowerPoint, so I don't know how I would email that. So bear with me for just one sec and I'll see if I can figure it out. And if I can't, then I'll run through it and send it later. Because I'm not familiar with Google Meets.
Yeah, so Christy, on the bottom where you see your row of buttons,
Mhm.
couple buttons to the left, there should be a square with an arrow pointing up.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that should be the button to share the screen.
So do I share the entire screen or just a window?
If you can share just the PowerPoint window, that would be best. It prevents the mirroring effect. So if that's possible.
Yeah, it's just for some reason it's not showing up. So so I'm not going to waste all of our time trying to figure all that out. I'll just run through it and then I'll send it because a lot of it is just pictures that I had and some videos that I had. And basically what this started out as was just an email that I sent to Courtney a while back. It was back in July. And, you know, at that time we were having to make some decisions as a group on what direction we wanted to go and what we thought was important. And at that particular time, I felt very pressured because I'm like, wait a minute, I don't think we've been able to look at all the information. Well, fast forward to today, and I'm realizing that it doesn't work that way. So I'm super happy with where we are as a group, but that's how that started. And basically, my whole point was, I think that there's some low-hanging fruit that maybe we should, as a group, consider. And there are several items that I would identify as low-hanging fruit that maybe we don't have to have legislative action on. And the first one would be, for me, you know, remember, I'm a rancher, I'm a forest permittee, and those are the requirements for me to be on this committee. And so from a grazing standpoint, I think that we should, for forests and for fires and for right now overall forest health, really focus, or we could focus on reducing the fuel load. Like, it's that simple. There is a super simple solution in my mind to help prevent some of these catastrophic fires. And so grazing would be one potential solution. It sounds maybe naive, but this is something that, you know, we can do. We don't have to worry about a lot of boots on the ground right now. We can put animals on these forests or open spaces that have all the grasses and reduce that fuel load. That would be point number one. And that is something that private industry can do. Cattle ranchers can do that. People, you know, people are looking for grass, for pasture, all that kind of stuff. It's hard to do with all the red tape, but that is an immediate way we could reduce fuels. We could even do it tomorrow. A second thought that I had was logging. And that's another thing. Let private industry go in there and get some of these fuels out of here. And I'm really bummed that I don't have these pictures for you guys, but if you'll look at them when they get sent, you can see, like, one of the pictures, I'm looking to the left and it was logged maybe 30 years ago. And then I turn and I pan my camera and I'm looking to the right, and it's just, you know, sticks or huge logs all over. You can't get through the forest. Nobody can recreate on it. Animals can't get through it to graze and reduce that fuel load. So here in our forest, it's terrible. We've got some pretty unhealthy forests up here. I'm not saying that both of these are the be all end all, but they're a tool. And the other thing is they're not necessarily as socially acceptable as doing nothing. It seems to me like, you know, it's been more acceptable socially to just do nothing. And maybe that's under the guise of conservation. And I'm not so sure that that's helped us. There are some impacts from everything that we do on the forest. But I think that that's some of our low hanging fruit, and then prescribed burning. So there's a video that I got a couple years ago. We had like a little microburst up here, and it laid down all of our trees in a part of our forest, and they were stacked up as high as the pack on our pack horse. So like 6 feet, something like that. And you couldn't even get through the whole forest. So I took some video to show you guys. And that's just, it's my example of an unhealthy forest. And maybe some of that low hanging fruit right there is prescribed burning. It's not without risk. That prescribed burning is not without risk. But what's the greater risk? Do we just allow these forests to keep loading up on this fuel and they burn, and, you know, habitat is ruined? It doesn't matter if we have roads in the forest after, you know, these huge wildfires come through. I'm just thinking that there are lesser evils than these fires that will happen if we continue to A, do nothing, or B, maybe just conserve, or C, talk about it. And that was my frustration in the beginning. Was it seems like there's a lot, you know, there's just a lot of talk about planning. And the analogy that I use is if we tried to plan like in ranching, it would just be plan, you know, and never do anything. It would just be totally catastrophic. If I had a heifer that was trying to have a calf, and a heifer is a cow that's never had a calf before, sometimes they need a little help. And if I called my neighbors and said, what do you think I ought to do? Eventually, if I talk about it and call people about it enough, the situation will resolve itself, and the calf will die and the heifer will die if we don't do anything. That's the cost of inaction. And I kind of feel like that sometimes with the forest stuff, that, you know, we got to do something. Maybe not everything is the right thing, but I think what we've been doing is not the right thing. I think the Good Neighbor Authority might be some other low-hanging fruit that we as a group could build on. And my whole thought with that is just like, let's make that a big deal and put it on steroids. So we're doing that up here, and it's like 2,000 acres. And I think they can do up to 5 miles of roads, which is just a drop in the bucket. It doesn't even scratch the surface. Are there ways that we can put pressure on groups, to whoever we're supposed to put pressure on groups to maybe, you know, really make that a big deal? And then lastly, I think if we can put some pressure or influence some of these organizations to reduce the education requirements. You know, we have immediate needs right now, and there are such roadblocks because of the education requirements, which, you know, I'm not so sure how much that really does. I mean, I deal with the Forest Service up here, and, you know, just the formal education is perhaps not the best short-term solution. And then I also think influencing our community colleges, like we talked about, and getting that ball rolling will help. So in summary, I just think that we have some low-hanging fruit that if we can maybe focus over the next couple of years on some of that, maybe we can actually affect some change in the short term. That's it.
Julie has her hand raised. Or Christy, would you?
Okay.
Would that be great? Julie, go ahead.
Yeah, Christy, I had a question. When you were talking about the grazing piece, I guess one of the questions that I had is, what do you perceive as a roadblock to getting more grazing happening? Is it a need to get the word out? Is the permitting process bogged down and it's just cumbersome or too expensive or takes too long to get a permit? Where are the roadblocks to making that more efficient?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. There are roadblocks. There are federal regulations, and my permit is on the U.S. Forest Service, so it is federal. And so one point I wanted to make real quick. I'm gonna I'm going to make this real quick, Julie, but you know, these federal regulations affect me, but we pay for it at a local level. And so it was hard for me to kind of link, you know, my grazing type challenges to what we're dealing, because we're a state committee, but we still pay for it. So I think that we should have a voice, and maybe we can influence some of the federal regulations, but federal regulations definitely are an issue. And they are shutting down federal grazing permits. And part of the reason they're doing that is because of the advocacy work for people that don't want to have grazing or cattle or fill in the blank. So we have a public that is not always excited about grazing because they focus on some of the costs. And I'm you know, grazing has got to be done well. It's got to be balanced. There are going to be some costs. The cattle, you can't always just keep them off of the drainages, you know, or if you put salt out, you know, they're going to pound the ground in right around the salt. Just like somebody who goes up and camps for 3 months on the forest, which they do all the time. So, you know, it's not just a total benefit, but there are antiquated regulations and it makes it difficult. And then up here on our forests, just, you know, trying to move animals around, the health of our forest is so bad that it makes our grazing pastures less, not as easy to get around on. Yeah, and it doesn't apply. It does not apply everywhere. And so I completely recognize that. I'm just saying it's a tool. So an example with that Marshall Fire, there was an article, and it was an opinion piece that somebody did. And they basically said, had we grazed some of those grasslands around those houses, it might not have been so catastrophic and fast moving.
I know that's been a big controversy and a lot of opinions on both sides, because some said they had been. It's just, you know, that one person, but I saw that piece as well. I think Mr. Morgan had his hand raised. And Julie, did you have any more further to your question?
No, that was helpful. Thank you.
Comment for you, Julie. In dealing with this essentially for a lifetime, one of the biggest impediments that for everything that Christie wants to do is your NEPA planning. NEPA governs everything, and the feds have to go through their NEPA. And originally NEPA was envisioned as a relatively streamlined process, and it's gotten completely out of control. It's ridiculous. And a revision of your NEPA process would free up the ability of these agencies. One thing that they're trying to do, and not very well, but do NEPA planning on a much larger scale. You have to get your NEPA planning done for whole watersheds, and then you can institute individual things. But the thing, asking about the roadblocks, and Julie, you asked about, NEPA is a huge, huge roadblock. And we were on our way to streamlining some of it, but that has to be dealt with. And then I think the other thing that you mentioned, that you have to have a social license, call it what you want, to do these projects. And that's educational. It's an educational process and a NEPA process. And if you can get the NEPA done, then you can get the work done. And lastly, my last comment on this would be that Good Neighbor is a great tool. I've been involved with it. Good Neighbor originated here in Colorado, and I was involved with it 20 plus years ago. One of the problems with Good Neighbor right now is that we need to adequately staff the State Forest Service. They don't have the staff to implement the Good Neighbor money that's coming down that they could be used. And that's just some thoughts that I've had over a long period of time of dealing with this stuff. But I think you're right on, Christie, on a lot of these, and the grazing, the fuel reduction. My last comment would be this. I'll be brief here, but one of the things you mentioned is that I've always said doing nothing is a management choice, and it is usually the choice with the most dramatic results. But doing nothing is a true management choice, just like any other management decision, and it usually has the the largest impact, good or bad. But just some thoughts for you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Hillary has her hand up, and then Julie after Hillary. And then I have a comment or a question. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Christy, for taking the time to put that together, and I look forward to seeing your pictures. Can you expand a little bit on the education, that more education is needed? We've been talking about this a lot lately. Do you mean specifically education for loggers, for timber? What kind of education specifically are you talking about?
I was meaning more like just educating the public on some of the benefits of fill in the blank of grazing, of logging, of prescribed fires, and maybe with what's going to happen. Like, grazing is not the answer for every part of the state. I know that, but as a tool, it could be used for management. And so maybe to educate the general public on some of the benefits of fill in the blank, whatever that low-hanging fruit was. Does that answer your question, Hillary?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And that also gets to Mike's point of that social license is needed, and really building those collaboratives that are, science-based, with industry at the table, with the state and feds at the table, with community members, is really critical. And that's been our challenge in this region. I mean, admittedly, my region prefers a do nothing approach, and historically this region has for many, many years. And actually it has, up until this point, we haven't seen the beetles at, epidemic levels. Our forests have really been able to withstand significant impacts. We haven't had major fires, or the fires that we have had, we can let them burn, and they have been in forest types that that's actually good for the forest. So we've been incredibly fortunate with our do nothing approach. I mean, that said, 100 years ago, they cut down everything here for the mining industry. So it's, only been a 100-year history of do nothing. So I think that sort of place-based approach is absolutely needed. And that collaborative approach takes a ton of time, and it takes, all the right players at the table. And we are slowly building that here, and we're slowly, maybe sometime in the near term, getting help from our West Region Wildfire Collaborative, who's been understaffed for several years. So I completely agree with you on that, and that's kind of back to that collaborative discussion. And it also takes a good facilitator. There are bad facilitators out there, and the conversation goes south and goes nowhere, and then you got to spend a couple of years rebuilding it. So that is, I think, a key component, and a low-hanging fruit that's not easy to solve. It's not ripe yet, but one that I think we can focus on to really build that, place-based, science-based industry partnership approach for each of our regions. And then just a quick example, we did a 10-year programmatic NEPA here. We have one in place. It's called SPEED-MER, Spruce Beetle Epidemic Management Decline, Aspen Management Decline, whatever. So it's spruce and aspen, basically. And it's a 10-year programmatic NEPA. And the idea was that it was going to expand the industry, and it was going to bring out, small scale, local partners, local businesses, et cetera. And it was going to be sort of a quick annual program to deal with really forest health was the goal. It has been and adaptive management. I'm not going to spend a ton of time, and maybe we could do a presentation on it if you all are interested. It's been a great learning opportunity. It's been successful in some areas. Some would argue, and I'm starting to hear more and more, that it, especially the conservation community, argues that it's not successful. The industry kind of argues that It's not that great either because they haven't been able to expand the industry, and there's not a lot of small businesses that have jumped up from it, other than ones that are directly associated with. We have one supplier here, Montrose Forest Products, and they're able to sustain, but I mean, I'm not going to speak for them. It'd be interesting to have them on here too. So we have tried that, and we can learn from that. And I think there are opportunities to really learn from that. And I do believe it can be a valuable tool, and I was involved with it from the start. And we tripped up a lot. And so, learning from the lessons of the GMUG, I think would be really helpful to apply in other regions.
Thanks, Commissioner Cooper. Julie, your hand's next.
Thank you. So just a couple reactions to what Christy and Mr. Morgan have said. Bringing in the utility perspective here, right? Because I think what I am hearing both from the ranching community and the logging community is not uncommon from what I think the utilities experience. And I say that from this perspective. I mean, what I'm hearing you say is that as it pertains to the federal lands, right? And I get that's a federal issue, but I want to make sure we all understand that their policy, their forest health absolutely has an impact on our state, on our local communities, on our people, and everything about our way of life. So I do think it's relevant. And I think how they are functioning and how that impacts matters to all of us. From the utility perspective, what I can share, I have experienced, and maybe just to take a quick step back. So yes, I'm a lawyer for Excel. I'm specifically focused on real estate and land use matters. So I am intimately aware of federal permitting, state permitting, local permitting, and where there's room for improvement. We do struggle also with capacity issues, right? Capacity issues at the state and federal level for those agencies on their grounds to do their work, right? And so what we have experienced as an industry, when the feds didn't have enough people to get in there, reduce fuels, reduce hazard trees, do the work, it sort of shifts to private industry oftentimes to raise their hand and say, listen, can we help? Can we come to the table and work out some kind of an agreement where we can do the work? And the pinch point there becomes, as Mr. Morgan said, NEPA can be a real challenge, right? Because there's this tension between a very real and present risk and the need to reduce it, and the conversation about how do you do that without impacting endangered species and many other really important aspects. And so there's a tension there. And cover my logo for a minute and say, I feel like there sometimes can be a tension, right, between that focus, and it gets lost that if we don't reduce this very real hazard in a timely fashion, the risks to all those things you are trying to protect with your NEPA studies, etc., they're going to be impacted in a very real and other way. I think the other thing that we experience, the lack of capacity, right? And so if industry tries to step in and say, we can help, but then it literally takes 2 years to negotiate an agreement regarding whose risk is it anyway, right? When you're trying to step in and throw the bodies at the problem, there just is a tension on who should bear the risk of getting that work done. And it can boggle the mind a little bit. So it's a capacity issue. It's a burden with regulations. And I think the impacts to our community and how that works, and sort of just taking a big step back and saying, look, from a common sense perspective, when we know, just to give you an example, when we know that we have trees dying because of the forest health, and they are in close proximity to a high power transmission line, but the utility has no right to step off the transmission corridor and deal with that tree, and you can't get, because they don't have the capacity, the right state or federal folks to get in there and do that work, it just it kind of defies common sense, right? I mean, it seems like we should be able to figure that out far more quickly and set aside some of the regulatory roadblocks to allow the right thing to happen.
Thank you, Julie. I thank you all, and Christy and Morgan and Commissioner Cooper. Everyone's been, and Pat, thank you for sharing the name of the Commissioner Cooper's NEPA 10-year plan. I appreciate that. I'll have to look that up. So my question, because we hear a lot from folks up here because we have one of the only wild and scenic rivers left in the United States, the Poudre River. And so when we had our big flood last year, our debris flow flood that took 5 lives, and we had, tanks and things in the river, we couldn't go in and use equipment to pull a refrigerator and a tank out, right? And so we had to finally get the Conservation Corps and kind of carefully go and extract that with a dozen of the Conservation Corps to pull some of those things out. So we have a lot of folks who talk about, the importance of the river. And that's one thing I've heard from some of the conservationists is that is that balance of grazing on public lands, because it does, especially if they're near watersheds and rivers, that the compacting of the soil and especially along the river banks and the balance of depleting the native vegetation, but the benefit of maybe eating some of the invasive weeds and invasive grasses, which we've had a lot of issues here in Larimer County. It's that balance of, and I know we'll hear maybe from the fish, Trout Unlimited, and some of those other wildlife and fish advocates. So I just kind of also wanted to kind of bring that question up for you, Christy. Do you feel like there's enough of those folks who have some of these grazing permits and that are doing this, that are educated enough to know when to be careful, to stay away from river banks, and when to move? And like you said, there's some of those, because of the health, it's hard to find those spots and when to rotate and which areas to stay away from. Do you feel like some of the ranchers and folks that have these permits have that the information they need and the partnerships they need to help for a successful partnership with those permits? Am I making my question clear?
Yeah. And I would say overall, yes. But the thing is just like everything else, there are plenty of bad examples. Overall, anybody in the ranching industry, we generally we're not going to cut off our nose to spite our faces. So we're not going to just go in and totally ruin the whole landscape because we're the ones that pay for that the following year. So it doesn't matter if it's federal land or our own private land. So the ranchers, generally speaking, have a vested interest. But practically speaking, is it perfect? Not at all. Could we do better? All the time. As we learn more and as things change and new science and data comes out, sure, we can do better. But still, again, to me, it's still very simple. Fuel reduction where appropriate. And then just like Julie said a minute ago, so if we trip up somewhere and maybe a spot that's near a drainage gets overgrazed, that's still a lesser evil than a catastrophic wildfire that comes in and just takes care of everything. So Jody, to answer your question, do we understand maybe the importance of and have good information and good education? I would say overall, yes. But it doesn't mean that, it's going to be perfect. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I have an example because I actually took a land stewardship tour with my county and with our land stewardship agent who does a lot of mitigation work. And we, for those of you who know Fort Collins, the Horsetooth Mountain area, this is some land that we own on the west side of the hill that's not open to the public, and there are some private landowners around who are raising cattle, and then there are some grazing around that area, and there's not a lot, there's no fences, but there was some areas that our staff have blocked off so that for the cattle safety, because it was near a ravine, but also because it was getting near kind of a drainage. And so I actually got to see some of this in practice last week, and I raised a lot more questions. And it was it certainly it was a partnership between the staff and the local landowners to kind of block off some of the meadows and things that they were trying to recover for getting the native grasses back and the native plants. And they were trying to get rid of some of the I forgot which grass it was. It's very invasive, but we're really having a hard time. Well, we're having some success getting rid of it and reclaim some of our natives. And so it was a chance for me to see this kind of partnership between our staff and trying to block off areas that we were in reclamation. And it was something that I was thinking about for this meeting today. It's just, for me, I was interested to hear your presentation, and I appreciate all the time you put in. And I know you're stepped out of your other job to kind of do this, so I appreciate your time. And I just wanted to kind of hear about that, because I do know, as you said, there are bad actors. There's always bad actors for that kind of seem to be more the story that everyone hangs on to. And but there's also a lot of good partnerships and good collaborations that are that make this a something that should be explored, because there are some benefits, I think. So just some thoughts I had. So I'm not sure who, I think Pat had her hand up next, or my, is that okay? Because I was talking, wasn't paying attention to the timing. So Pat, I'll let you go ahead.
Thank you. And I defer to Mark because he looks bigger than me if we have to. But so what I was going to say is, I think, like Hillary brought up collaboration. I see what Christina has pasted in the chat with grazing being a good tool in the toolbox, but doesn't always work, right? There are times when it does. There's times when the management prescription actually calls for a reduction of those fine fuels that are on the forest floor, and grazing would be a good tool. And then to Julie's point about utilities wanting to clear utility lines, and I think Christina can back me up on this, but through the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative, one of the things that we've tried to do is incorporate the collective impact of all of these things on the landscape. So if our utility is clearing power lines, that counts acres toward our goal, right? And it's really critical acres, because most of the time those are around WUI and stuff like that. And so I think building in utilities and livestock permittees and other people into that collaborative process to think about how they can be used to meet the collaborative's goals, or to meet the goals on the Upper South Platte partnership, or in Southwest Colorado, really deserves some time to think about that. And I think one of the things, and I'll say this, Julie, it's hard sometimes to get a utility company to come to a local meeting about forestry, right? Because you got a million issues and you don't have the time for that, so maybe we need to think about how we strengthen the network to some of those non-traditional partners. But I really appreciate this discussion. And Christy, I'm sorry if I took us way down a rabbit trail, but I appreciate you kind of bringing the conversation forward.
Great. Mr. Morgan, I guess you had your hand up before I go to Christy and then to Julie, but did you have something you want to add? I do remember you had your hand up when Pat did too.
Yes. Were you talking to me?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I didn't hear it at first there. Two things. I sense Christy's frustration on some things here. And one of these is that we talk, we plan, we do all this, and people are looking for action. They're looking for results. And one of the measures that I have for being involved in this group or any other group is acres managed on the ground. At the end of the day, however you get it done, but acres managed on the ground is one of my personal yardsticks. And then the other one is one of the past chiefs of the Forest Service made the point a few years back here that by and large, with these kinds of efforts, our sins have been excuse me, our sins have been ones of omission far greater than sins of commission, meaning that the things we did on the ground, by and large, were successful. We talked about things not being perfect, but not doing something is the far greater risk than occasionally doing the wrong thing. And I think we have to, I suggest anyway, that we look at it with that mindset, because I have watched for years, and the do nothing approach is turning into a disaster that we can't stand. And so the hillbilly saying for this is, let's do something even if it's wrong, and when it's wrong, let's learn from it and do something more. But I know the environmental side of that is always, well, we can do anything as long as we save all the pieces and don't do any damage. But I think we're going to have to break some eggs to make some omelets here. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. So I think Julie and then Chrissy. Actually, it looks,
Okay.
is that okay? I'll let you finish
sure.
with Chrissy
Mhm.
then. So, because we're almost out of time, so I want to honor everyone's time. And I actually have, it's supposed to be my day of catching up, but I've also am full of meetings. So Julie, I'll go ahead and let you start. And then Christy, I'll let you finish up and wrap it up.
First, I just wanted to offer to Pat, or frankly anyone, if there's ever a connection that needs to be made, frankly with my utility or others, we work a lot with the others. Happy to get you to the right people and put a body in the room, because I think we too always are looking for opportunities, right, to collaborate and move the needle forward. And just to dovetail on points that were made not only in this meeting but also on the other strategic, how do we collaborate subcommittee. I mean, I think what I hear the frustration between some of the members here and frankly myself is, I think first and foremost, it feels like the focus needs to be on bringing the current forest health up to where it should be. And then how do we maintain that on a go forward basis, right? I mean, I think, I just think that's I think we're all struggling with that, because I think everyone understands we aren't where we need to be. It has impacts to the endangered species, has impacts to the watershed. So how do we fix it quickly, given the inaction and however we got here? And then how do we move it forward to keep it in a good spot? So that Colorado looks like, the gold standard for how you maintain your forests, and other states are looking to us to say, they've got it. They're doing it right. Do it the way Colorado does it. And it strikes me that, when I think about what we've all just come through in the pandemic, right? And we had something hit us that we weren't looking for. We weren't prepared. But suddenly you had federal and state and local folks initiating their emergency powers and saying, look, we don't know how we got here, but we're in a mess and we need to fix it. And so it just strikes me a little bit that, is that a tool in the toolbox that we're not looking hard enough at? Should we be looking at the crisis of this forest health situation? And is that a recommendation? Should there be some emergency management orders that are coming out to say, do this quickly, go get it done, and here's how we think you should do it? Just a question.
Great, Julie. And I'm going to before you wrap it up, Christy, I just wanted to maybe add on to that. I think this, as we've been talking, I was thinking this is a great conversation that was really applicable to the leveraging resources, because a lot of us are in that one too. And so I'm wondering if, this is a conversation we should share with that other subcommittee or committee to let them know about this conversation, because I agree, this is a really good tool for the toolbox, but I think we're right. I think we've all said it doesn't apply everywhere, but it's something that we should explore. And I think this has been a really fantastic and robust discussion. And I'm thinking, again, this is probably good for the council as a whole too, to see. And I'm not sure if we can, if Courtney, we can recommend to leveraging, since this is a similar conversation, for a agenda item or a conversation as a whole. So, and Christy, I'm going to go ahead. I just want to thank you all for being here today. We're almost out of time, but I want to let Christy kind of wrap it up, and then we'll just have our next couple agenda items. But I just wanted to let Christy kind of wrap up her, since she's doing this presentation, any points she wanted to make, and then we'll talk about next steps.
Thank you. We pretty much covered everything, so I don't think I need to take any more time. I think just in summary, I would like to have more of these discussions about what we can, as a group, what we might be able to do in the near term that will produce some results. So thank you. Thank you guys for your time.
No, thank you, Christy. And I appreciate everyone, being open to, I think it was great because we're all open into listening and bringing some different perspectives. And I hear the years of frustration and that we're at the point where we're at, but I feel like, looking forward, I think the big thing I hear is collaboration and partnerships. And I think we're all on the same page. We all want to see the needle move on, some treated lands and how we move forward on this. So I think that's one thing that I take out of that positive. I think we all are on the same page for where we want to go. And so, but I think it's going to take the whole toolbox. I think it's going to take the entire toolbox to get there. So I appreciate everyone's time today. So the other thing I had on here was just next steps. For this committee, we have another meeting in 2 weeks that we're going to have another presentation. And I'm trying to remember, Courtney, I gave kind of an order. Hillary was the third, but I was trying to remember who was second. Was that?
I think it was Representative Cutter.
Oh, that's right. So Representative Cutter, do we need to make a formal invite to her from the council? And I can do that, but I just wanted to kind of, because I've kind of had a conversation with her, but I didn't remember which date it was going to be. And then Hillary's in the 2 weeks after that, right?
Yeah, that's right. I can check with Angela about maybe the formal process, or if you've already been speaking with her, Jody, I'm sure that's.
Well, if we could just make sure since this is kind of a pretty high level committee, I want to make sure we're just following protocols. And so, and Hillary.
I'll check on the protocols with Angela.
Okay, but I've been talking to her, and I know she's super busy, so I want to make sure. I think this time works better for her on a Friday morning anyway, but I just want to kind of make sure I'm following protocols. So Hillary, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, can you remind me of why I'm on the agenda?
Well, a few weeks ago, you talked about you wanted to present about forest health and soil and kind of some things. It was kind of that conversation you wanted to have. I think you also had in leveraging resources. So if you don't want to have it, we can certainly push it down and we can have some other conversations we might need an update about the status. We might need a good chunk of time about the status of where the bills are at, because a lot of bills are starting to get really formed, and I just thought it might be a good chance to also get an update where they're at. So.
Yeah, I'll defer to that. I think my conversation was more around mapping opportunities and the technology at CSU and GIS optimization, and I will try to pull that together, but I need to pull a group of people together that I work with at CSU. So thanks for that reminder. And that might be leveraging resources. I'm not sure that's a legislative concept. So I would prefer I'll defer to the legislative update, which I think obviously is completely relevant to this committee.
Cool. Yeah, and I think that's another thing to remind, we're having some conversations in this that might be better for the leveraging resources, and then, or as a council as a whole. So I think I will go ahead and have Representative Cutter the next meeting, and then unless she can't come, and then if she can't come until the next week, then we'll flip and we'll have the update on where the bills are at. So we kind of know how that's forming, because as you all know, that's a constantly in flux and ever changing. So, so with that, let's go ahead and end on time, a couple minutes over. Anybody else, any other burning issues of the day or things they'd like to?
I'm sorry I joined late, and I wasn't there last time. I've had too many meetings, even on Friday morning. Last time was the fire commission, so.
Nice to see you, Commissioner Tisdale, and yes, we all.
See you guys.
Yeah, it's great to see you, and yes, very busy. We're all kind of, feels like it's getting busier than ever. So with that, I'll take, it's right, but thanks for joining us today, everyone. And with that, I welcome a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
Second?
So moved. I'm second, please.
All right, cool. Mr. Morgan, second. All those in favor say aye.
Bye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and please take care.
Thanks, Chairman McNally.
Thank you.
Ready?
Thanks, Christina.